Malaysia and Russia to explore untapped potential of various areas. And also Boeing inks record-breaking deal with Qatar Airways. Good afternoon and salam Malaysia Madani. Thanks for joining us. I'm Bernard Paul. Malaysia and Russia have expressed a shared intention to deepen trade and investment between the two nations, signalling a new chapter in their growing bilateral relationship. Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim said while relations between the two countries have been good, there is still significant untapped potential in areas such as trade, investment and collaboration.
That shows that our commitment to enhance bilateral relations beyond what we have achieved thus far. It's true, the President has stated in such clarity that the relations has been good, but the potential for investments, trade and collaboration need to be further enhanced.
During a joint press conference with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Datuk Seri Anwar welcomed Russia's support in key sectors such as training, aerospace, science, technology and innovation, technical and vocational education and training, as well as digitalization. The Prime Minister also noted Malaysia's interest in collaborating with Russia in the fields of semiconductor and artificial intelligence, given the importance of these sectors in driving future economic growth. He added that both leaders also discussed broader international issues and emphasized the importance of a rules-based multilateral order. On another note, the Prime Minister has invited Russian airlines, including Aeroflot, to resume direct flights to Malaysia.
We have taken a position of centrality in Malaysia and ASEAN to decide for ourselves what's best for Malaysia and its people. And therefore, we would like to request and suggest that the Russian airlines, including Aeroflot, to resume direct flight route to Malaysia as soon as possible.
Aeroflot is the largest Russian airline group, which includes the Rasmi and Pobeda Airlines. The Aeroflot group is the undisputed leader of Russian commercial aviation. Aeroflot is constantly expanding its domestic route network, including flights between the country's regions, developing socially oriented transportation programs, and implementing its flat fares on flights to cities in the country's Far East and Kaliningrad. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that Russia-Malaysia relations are strengthening, reaffirming both countries' commitment to deepening meaningful and productive cooperation. He said Datuk Seri Anwar's official visit to Russia clearly demonstrates that bilateral ties are developing successfully and progressively, with both sides expressing strong interest in making their cooperation more substantive and transparent. Said he and Datuk Seri Anwar discussed a spectrum of relevant issues concerning bilateral interaction as well as pressing matters on the international agenda. He added both leaders identified specific plans to strengthen Russia-Malaysia cooperation in the future. Putin noted that both nations have always strived to work in partnership, building on the principles of mutual respect and mutual understanding. He added that Russia and Malaysia have all the necessary prerequisites to further enhance their partnership. Elaborating on his discussion with the Prime Minister, Putin said that given Malaysia's current chairmanship of ASEAN, the talks touched on prospects for further developing substantive dialogue between the International Association and Russia. In another matter, Datuk Seri Anwar said he raised the issue of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, which was shot down over Ukraine in 2014, during his meeting with the Russian president. According to the Premier, the matter was brought up to represent the families of the victims affected by the tragedy.
Putin dengar dengan teliti dan menyatakan pertama, dia telah melahirkan simpati dan takziah kepada keluarga. Tidak pernah berganjal. Dia telah daripada awal memohon supaya kajian itu harus bebas dan teliti. Dan pihak Rusia bersedia untuk memberikan semua kerjasama untuk memastikan laporan itu lebih kredibel.
Dato' Sri Anwar was asked to comment on the recent developments concerning the International Civil Aviation Organization's findings, which concluded that Russia was responsible for the downing of flight MH17. He added the Russian president had emphasized his call for a thorough, comprehensive and non-politicized investigation. Dato' Sri Anwar further said he would inform the victims' families about the feedback given by Putin. US President Donald Trump said Qatar Airways had placed a record order for 160 planes from Boeing as he signed a raft of deals in Doha alongside Qatar's Emir. The order, Boeing's largest ever for its wide-body jets, deepens ties between the US aerospace giant and the giant West Asia carrier. According to a Boeing news release, the order is comprised of 130 Dreamliner planes and 30 Boeing 777-9 jets, which are still being certified by the US Federal Aviation Administration. It added there are also options for 50 additional 787 and 777X planes. The list prices of the 777X and 787 Dreamliner suggest the total value of the Boeing deal is well under $200 billion. The order represents a win for new Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg, though analysts noted that the planes will not be delivered for at least 5 years due to industry backlogs. Both Boeing and rival Airbus, which has also sold extensively to Qatar Airways, have struggled in recent years with supply chain problems as they have taken thousands of plane orders amid strong airline demand. Boeing has also been beset with safety and labor problems that have limited output. China and Colombia have signed a joint cooperation plan on the Belt and Road Initiative after their leaders met in Beijing. Burgeoning commerce in recent years has helped grow Beijing's influence in Latin America and the Caribbean, a region of strategic significance for the United States. China is Colombia's second-largest trading partner after the United States, which it recently displaced as Colombia's largest source of imports. China is ready to import more high-quality products from Colombia, back its firms in investing and doing business there, and join in infrastructure construction. Previously, Colombian President Gustavo Petro said Colombia would join the Belt and Road Initiative launched by Xi Jinping in 2013 to recreate the ancient Silk Road and build China's trade and infrastructure links with the world. More than 20 Latin American nations are among the more than 150 countries participating in the program. But in February, Panama said it was exiting from the pact, a move China blamed on pressure from the US. Petro, who took over in August 2022, made his first trip to China as president in October 2023, upgrading to a strategic partnership, two-way ties, first established in 1980. Peruvian President Dina Boluarte has appointed her fourth prime minister in under 3 years amid fresh protests over the government's handlings of a surge in gang violence. On Tuesday, Boluarte's most trusted ally, Gustavo Adrianzen, resigned to avoid being ousted by Congress in a no-confidence vote over spiraling numbers of murders and extortion records. Former Justice Minister Eduardo Arana was sworn in yesterday as his successor. Boluarte, one of the most unpopular presidents in recent Peruvian history, with an approval rating of around 2%, reshuffled the cabinet ahead of the confidence vote to prevent the government collapsing. Boluarte has clung to power despite numerous scandals and demonstrations demanding her departure. With no party of her own, she governs with the support of a right-wing coalition that has a majority in Congress. The swearing-in of the new Prime Minister came as citizens in the Andean nation again took to the streets to demonstrate against an explosion in gang violence. In March, Boluarte sent the army into the streets of the capital Lima to try and restore order. Several parts of the country are under a state of emergency. In other news, the head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, told staff the UN agency is reducing its management team by nearly half due to dramatic US funding cuts. Tedros announced a new composition of the executive management team at the agency's Geneva headquarters, with 6 members down from 11. He noted that the new team takes over from 16 June. 5 exiting members or existing members will remain, including Jeremy Farah, a British medical researcher and former head of London-based health charity, the Wellcome Trust. He will become the WHO's Assistant Director General in charge of health promotion and disease prevention and control, handing over his current position as chief scientist to French physician Sylvie Briand, current head of the agency's Pandemic and Epidemic Diseases Department. Tedros told member states last month the agency would need to slash operations and jobs as US funding cuts had left the organization with a budget hole of several $100 million. While further cuts are not expected immediately, the issue is likely to be on delegates' minds as countries gather for the WHO's annual decision-making assembly next week. And still ahead, multi-vehicle crash on Mexican highway leaves at least 21 dead. Stay with us. But before that, President Vladimir Putin will not attend talks in Turkey with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. This is according to the Kremlin, which named a lower-level team for the first direct Russia-Ukraine contacts on their conflict in more than 3 years. Zelensky had challenged Putin to meet him in person at the talks, with US President Donald Trump also appearing to urge the Kremlin leader to come to the negotiating table. The Istanbul negotiation would be the first direct peace talk since discussions in the first weeks of the conflict broke down without a deal. After days of declining to say if Putin would go, the Kremlin named its negotiating team yesterday. The Russian side will be headed by Vladimir Medinsky, a hardline aide to Putin and former culture minister who was involved in 2022 negotiations. Putin, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Kremlin Foreign Policy aide Yuri Ushakov, who had all been rumored as top negotiators after leading previous talks with the US, were not named in the delegation. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected in Istanbul tomorrow for part of the talks. Putin last weekend proposed direct negotiations that had come under intense international pressure, including from some allies, to meet with Zelensky. UN Special Envoy for Yemen Hans Grunberg has warned of a dangerous escalations between Israel and the Houthis as the Israeli army carried out strikes on the Iran-backed group.
Events in the recent weeks, however, have also served as stark reminders that Yemen is ensnared in the wider regional tensions. The attack carried out by Ansar Allah on Ben Gurion Airport on the 4th of May and the subsequent strikes by Israel on Hodeidah Port, Sana'a Airport and other locations in response represent a dangerous escalation, and the threats and attacks regrettably continue. I renew my call for all parties to abide by their obligations under international law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure.
Grunberg also welcomed the recent ceasefire deal between the Houthis and the United States, calling it an important and necessary de-escalation and an opportunity on which everyone must collectively build to refocus on resolving Yemen's conflict. Meanwhile, the UN's head of humanitarian operations, Tom Fletcher, raised alarms about the deteriorating humanitarian situation in war-torn Yemen, noting that half of the country's children suffer from malnutrition. With the drop in contributions from donor countries, notably the United States, the agency is running out of time and resources. At least 80 people were killed in Israeli bombardment across Gaza as Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to US envoy Steve Witkoff about the release of hostages. Negotiations for the release of the captives held in Gaza have been ongoing, with the latest talks taking place in the Qatari capital Doha, where US President Donald Trump was visiting yesterday. Netanyahu's office said the Israeli leader had discussed with Witkoff and his negotiating team the issue of the hostages and the missing. Witkoff later said Trump had a really productive conversation with the Qatari Emir about a Gaza deal, adding that they have a good plan on the matter. Fighting meanwhile raged in Gaza, where civil defense official Mohammed al-Mughayir said at least 80 people had been killed by Israeli bombardment since dawn, including 59 in the north. Footage from the aftermath of a strike in Jabalia, northern Gaza, showed mounds of rubble and twisted metal from collapsed buildings. Palestinians, including young children, picked through the debris in search of belongings. From the occupied West Bank, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said he favored a ceasefire at any price in Gaza, accusing Netanyahu of wanting to continue the war for his own reasons. Gunfire echoed through the Libyan capital of Tripoli, as seen in video footage released yesterday, coinciding with the government's announcement of a ceasefire. The violence marks a sharp escalation in tensions in the city. Clashes initially erupted on late Monday following the killing of a prominent militia leader. Although calm briefly returned on Tuesday morning, fighting flared again overnight, with intense battles spreading across multiple districts throughout the capital. The English-language Libyan Observer reported the main fighting yesterday was between the Dbeiba, a line 444 Brigade, and the Special Deterrence Force, the last major armed Tripoli faction not currently in Prime Minister Abdulhamid al-Dbeiba's camp. The government's defense ministry said the neutral units it was deploying around sensitive sites were from the police force, which does not carry heavy weapons. Monday's clashes have appeared to consolidate the power of Abdulhamid al-Dbeiba's Prime Minister of the divided country's government of national unity and an ally of Turkey. However, any prolonged fighting within Tripoli risks drawing in factions from outside the capital, potentially leading to a wider escalation between Libya's many armed players after years of relative calm. A fiery multi-vehicle crash involving a trailer, truck and a bus killed at least 21 people in central Mexico. According to an official with the Puebla state government, 18 people died at the scene and 3 more in hospital. The official further said an unspecified number of injured were being treated in local hospitals. Images published by Mexican media showed thick black smoke billowing from wreckage strewn along the highway connecting Puebla with the southern state of Oaxaca. Road accidents in Mexico have multiple in recent years, often due to poor vehicle maintenance, dangerous driving, or motorist fatigue. Many of the crashes that involve freight trucks, leading to calls for better safety standards of the country's congested highways. In one of the deadliest incidents, a collision between a truck and a bus killed 38 people in the southeastern state of Campeche on 8 February. In March, more than 30 people were killed in 2 separate bus crashes on the same day, including a collision between a tractor-trailer and a bus carrying passengers from the U.S. state of Texas. Spanish authorities told almost 80,000 residents near the southern city of Seville to stay indoors after a fire at a chemical products warehouse spread a giant plume of smoke. Emergency services said they received reports in the early afternoon of black smoke billowing from an industrial estate in Alcalá de Guadaira, a town of around 77,000 people southeast of Seville. They evacuated the estate and asked the town's population to close doors and windows to prevent the smoke from entering and stay at home. According to Alcalá de Guadaira Mayor Ana Isabel Jimenez Contreras, the fire started in a chemical warehouse, apparently due to a spark in a tank containing a quite toxic product. She added the danger no longer exists because the tank had completely burned and therefore the material no longer exists, explaining the blaze was controlled and contained. The mayor also said 2 people were likely injured and treated at the scene, comprising a worker who suffered burns and someone who inhaled smoke. The fire comes after more than 160,000 people near Barcelona were told to stay indoors for nearly 7 hours on Saturday after a fire at an industrial warehouse released a toxic cloud of chlorine over a wide area. 3 British right-wing extremists were convicted of planning to carry out a terrorist attack at mosques or synagogues as part of a race war. Prosecutors said at the start of their trial in March, Brogan Stewart and Marco Pizzetto, both 25, and Christopher Ringrose, 34, were preparing an act of terrorism when they were arrested in February last year. The trio were also each charged with 2 counts of collecting information which may be useful to someone preparing an act of terrorism, while Ringrose was charged with manufacturing a component for a 3D printed FG-C9 firearm. They pleaded not guilty, but jurors at Sheffield Crown Court convicted them all charges and they will be sentenced on 17 July. Prosecutor Jonathan Sandiford had told jurors that the 3 defendants expressed admiration for Adolf Hitler and perpetrators of notorious terrorist attacks, as well as hatred for non-white people, especially Muslims and immigrants. Next up in sports, Aaron Buyik power into second round of Thailand Open. We begin our sports segment with smashing news in badminton. National men's doubles pair, Aaron Chia and So Buyik, powered into the second round of the Thailand Open after defeating France's Julio Mayo and William Villaga. The reigning Asian men's doubles champions needed over an hour to secure a hard-fought 22-24, 21-19, 21-15 victory. Aaron acknowledged that playing after midnight had affected their performance, particularly in the opening game, but they managed to recover in the subsequent games. Aaron Buyik are expected to face Japan's Hiroki Midorikawa and Kyohei Yamashita in the next round scheduled later today. The national regu lived up to expectations by advancing to the semi-finals after defeating Brunei 2-0 in a quarter-final match of the Sepak Takraw Asian Cup at the TT Wangsa Stadium last night. Muhammad Haziq Khairul Nizam, Farhan Adam and Muhammad Azlan Alias had no issues maintaining their winning momentum as Group A champions to secure the first set 15-7. Muhammad Shahir Rosdi was brought in to replace Muhammad Haziq, injecting team spirit and helping to close out the victory with a 15-4 score. The advance of the squad coached by Ahmad Muhammad Zain will see Malaysia face Vietnam after the latter overcame Indonesia 2-1 in another quarter-final match that also took place at the same venue. Moving on to tennis, third seed Carlos Alcaraz overcame a nervy start to beat Briton Jack Draper 6-4, 6-4 and reached the Italian Open semi-finals for the first time. Alcaraz said the match was one of his best displays of the season to book a last 4 dates with the man he beat in Monte Carlo last month. 4 times Grand Slam champion Alcaraz, who is gearing up to defend the French Open title later this month, fired off 24 winners in a strong performance to seal victory. Alcaraz had to be at his best to down 5th seed Draper, who put in another strong showing on clay in Italy after losing the Madrid Open final to Casper Ruud. The Briton lost control of the first set when, after taking a 2-game lead, he was broken twice by Alcaraz, who then took the lead in the match. And Alcaraz made sure of victory by breaking Draper to love to go 5-4, ahead in the second set before serving out the match. The Spaniard's impressive win over Draper kept alive his chances of a 3rd title of the season, and also moved him up to number 2 in the world rankings behind Jannik Sinner. And in the women's draw, world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka was knocked out in the quarterfinals by Chinese 8 seed Zheng Qingwen 6-4, 6-3. It was 7-time lucky for the world number 8 as she at last got the better of a Belarusian opponent with a confident display under the lights in Rome. Sabalenka's stunning clay court form deserted her at the Foro Italico as she fell in straight sets to Olympic gold medalist Zheng. After surviving early pressure on her own serve, Zheng broke Sabalenka to take a 3-2 lead in the first set before serving out. Zheng then pounced in Sabalenka's first service game in the second frame to go up a break. Sabalenka showed determination to make gritty holds in the fifth and seventh games of the set, but she could not make inroads on Zheng's service as the 22-year-old powered into the semis. Zheng will meet Coco Gauff in the last four after the American earlier beat Mira Andreeva 6-4, 7-6. Moving on to cycling, Mats Pedersen continued his domination of sprint finishes at the Giro d'Italia by narrowly winning Stage 5, his third victory of this year's race, which extended the Danish rider's overall lead. An Italian trio of Gesù Apis, Davide Baez and Lorenzo Milesi broke away just after the start. And after Apis was dropped later on, his two compatriots had their brave bid for glory ended with just 13 kilometers remaining. The bunch had earlier upped the pace on the Montes Calioso climb, with plenty of riders dropping out the back of the peloton and with more climbing towards the race finale. Pedersen's win looked at risk. Race favourite Primož Roglič hit the front with just over 2 kilometers to take the finish. But while Pedersen initially struggled, the Slovenian was unable to shake off the chasing pack. Once again, Pedersen's teammate Matej Vacek gave him the perfect lead out, and after his Czech colleague dropped off the front, Pedersen went early and his gamble paid off despite Eduardo Zambanini almost catching him on the line. The 10-second bonus for the win stretched Pedersen's lead to 17 seconds over Primož Roglič, with Vacek a further 7 seconds back in third ahead of today's Stage 6, a 227-kilometer ride from Potenza to Naples. And in football, UEFA Champions League trophies safely arrived in Munich yesterday, about 2 weeks before the final showdown scheduled to take place at the Allianz Arena on 31st May. The European Grand Trophy was back in Germany after 13 years. The final will witness Paris Saint-Germain PSG in hunting for their first glory in European competition and becoming the second club in France to win the title. However, they have to slay 3 times champions Inter Milan first before they could put their hands on the trophy. PSG booked their spots in the final after made an easy work against Arsenal with an aggregate 3-1. Meanwhile, for Inter Milan, they had a fierce semi-final clash against Barcelona. However, they made it to the final with an aggregate of 7-6. And that wraps up all today in our top story. Malaysia and Russia to explore untapped potential of various areas. Tune in to Malaysia Tonight coming up 8:30 p.m. on TV1 and Solar and Berita RTM. Till then, I'm Brendan Lepol from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you for watching. Take care.